So we have started this year journeying through the book of Matthew, and if you were here last week, you will have heard we started with a passage in Matthew called the Beatitudes, and we looked at that and how that can impact our life individually but also corporately. And today we continue our journey. In the Anglican Church, you journey through one of the different stories of Jesus every year. So last year we did Luke's book, telling the story of Jesus, and this year we are doing Matthew. So I'm going to pick up today from Matthew chapter 5. This is from verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. Oh, now I've made it go. There we go. You're the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavour? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world. Like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden, no one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. I tell you the truth. Until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Stern and confusing words in this passage, particularly this thought. Are we supposed to go and read the Old Testament and then keep every single law in it? Is that what Jesus is saying here? It's confusing in a way. Until you kind of think, actually, Jesus in his whole life, in his ministry, everything he said, everything he did, completely fulfilled those laws, and it just made religious people angry. They couldn't recognise who Jesus was. They couldn't see there was a pattern in his actions that reflected the God revealed in the laws that they had been given. And so while Jesus is saying, obey all those laws, we can see that Jesus, who obeyed everything that God told him, didn't look religious. In fact, his life was confusing. He went to the marginalised, he went to the outcast, he went to the poor, he went to the sick. He created this new community. He broke down religious divides and gender barriers. And this is the fulfilment of God's intention for humanity. And then there is this call at the start of this passage. You ought to do the same. Be a light to the world. Be salt to the earth. And today I actually want to ponder on these two things and focus a bit more. What does it mean to be light? What does it mean to be salt? In a way, I think the light one seems predictable. Go and be a good person. Let people see your good deeds. Don't be a dark person. Don't be a nasty person. That seems predictable. Although when I sort of I was looking for a particular quote online and I put in, quotes about light and darkness, and I realised that perhaps it's not predictable, perhaps not everyone understands it. I came across a quote by Sir Francis Bacon that said, you cannot see light unless there is dark. So, it's a bit depressing. It takes a dark night to be able to see the stars. What is that saying? Should we say, let's have a really terrible, bad world that we live in so that we can see the few flickers of goodness? Doesn't sort of make sense. What I was looking for, and a quote that I found quite a famous one, was by Martin Luther King. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Here's this picture and here's this invitation. We are to be light, driving out darkness. We are to show love, driving out hate. This is the invitation. Martin Luther King stood against some of the most evil, corrupt, unjust systems that we have seen established, in what seemed to be a democratic country. Racism was rife, and he chose this incredible path of peaceful resistance to demonstrate this is the way of Jesus in the world. Only light can drive out darkness. Only love can drive out hate. Here is the invitation. It's another quote that I came across by a famous preacher called Charles Spurgeon. He says this: "The Bible is not the light of the world, it is the light of the church. But the world does not read the Bible, the world reads Christians. You are the light of the world." There's this invitation, and there's something in the way Jesus is saying it. You're not being light, you're not being a good person for being a good person's sake. You're being a good person so that when people encounter you, they are left wondering, why is this person different? How are they different? I think there's some things where, it might be easy to take a stand. There are other times when this is harder. I was thinking of the times when perhaps my life isn't lightness, and I was thinking about times when I'm stuck on a long phone call with a call centre overseas somewhere, and they cannot solve my internet problem, and the light leaves my body, and I'm full of rage, and I'm not kind to the person on the end of the phone. I do that in secret. None of you need to find out. That's what I'm really like. This is probably the challenge for us all. There's the corners of our life, perhaps not as glib as the internet frustrations, but there's the corners where our lives are not light. We have secrets, we have darkness that is hiding what's really going on. Whether it's in our workplace, in our home, with our family, with those we encounter. And the good news is that Jesus does two things. Jesus comes to be the light we need to see, but also offers his very presence in us to transform us and to drive the dark out of our own heart, out of our own lives, so that being transformed, we can be light. God recognises we are creatures, that we need help, and he does not leave us in that state. He sends Jesus to rescue us and to transform us. And here's the invitation. Open ourselves up to be transformed so that we can be light to the world. So there's light. Jesus also talks about being salt of the earth. Now, I've heard this phrase quite a lot to describe people. Oh, he's salt of the earth. Man, salt of the earth. I looked up, what do people mean when they say that? What is the definition? So use my quick internet search. Salt of the earth. A person or group of people of great kindness, reliability, or honesty. I have noticed that the people I hear most being described about salt of the earth, or as salt of the earth, are farmers. And it may be because I have taken a new liking to Country Calendar. Me and my daughter really like it. We watch the rewind at online after. I don't know why. It's calming. Seems nice. I'm not a particular fan of cows and sheep, but here I am. Here's my confession. But anyway, they frequently talk about, and this farmer, he's salt of the earth. What do they mean? It's kind of this weird, glib expression. It's just good guy. Jesus, I think, was talking about something a little bit different. And you hear a lot of discussion. And people might preach, what does Jesus mean when he says, you're to be like salt? So I've heard various sermons on this. And, I might start with, how do we use salt? We use salt to bring out the flavour of our food, to turn something that is bland into something that is delicious. That's what we are to be in the world. People who bring out the good, who bring, flavour to the world. And then there's a second school of thought where people say, back in the day, salt was used primarily for preserving. Before people had fridges, when they had to ensure that the food lasted a long time and nothing was wasted, huge amounts of salt were used to preserve food. And so therefore, people who follow Jesus are supposed to preserve what is good in the world. While the world faces decay and mayhem, our job is to preserve. Now, there are kind of references and hints to this kind of thinking with both of those in the Bible. Here's a verse from Colossians, and it kind of uses salt in this way. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer everyone. Here's one use of the word salt. Be a good person, be flavourful, preserve what is right. This week, I heard a new description of what this might mean, and it was fascinating. Salt is used also on the earth, and that's the phrase that Jesus used, salt of the earth. He didn't say salt of the fish, salt of the food, salt of the preserving process. He said salt of the earth. And what is salt used when it's put on the earth? Tiny, tiny amounts of salt can go on soil, and there is debate over whether that's productive. And maybe again, it's because of my new obsession with farming through Country Calendar. I found myself reading an article this week on whether putting a small amount of salt on ground will increase clover production, which will in turn increase milk production. There's debate about this. It was an unfortunate rabbit hole that I fell down, but there we go. The second reason you put salt on the earth, and some of you may be familiar with this, I have a driveway that is gravel and there are weeds on it. And when I Googled what can you put to get rid of the weeds, one of the answers is salt. And they're like, but be careful, it will destroy the earth and it will not be able to produce again. So don't do it in a place where you might like to produce any food again. Is this a way that the Bible might be using the word salt? Well, this is what used to happen. Marauding armies would invade a country and then would pour salt all over their land as the conqueror to ruin it, to ruin those people. And this is an expression often found in the Bible, that things are turned into salt as a judgment. Here is some of the uncomfortable verses in the Bible from Deuteronomy. It says this, they will exclaim, the whole land is devastated by sulphur and salt. It is a wasteland with nothing planted and nothing growing, not even a blade of grass. It's like the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord destroyed in his intense anger. Salt in this context is a picture of God's judgment on people who have done unjust things. There's a sense, God said to his people Israel, if you act in unjust ways, and that included things like not caring for the poor, not welcoming foreigners into the land, if you do not follow God, if you bow down to other gods, judgment will end up coming. And this is the imagery God uses. Just like you see this judgment on other countries, God is looking in the world to see, is there judgment needed? This is difficult because we like to think and remind ourselves, and it is true, that God is loving and merciful, quick to forgive, slow to anger, abounding in gracious kindness. So how do we marry this up? What does it mean? Well, this week I came across some writings by a guy called Andrew Wilson. He's a minister in a church in London. And he says this, there's a sense in which disciples have the same purpose. God scatters salty Christians into the world as a way of judging evil, destroying wickedness, and preventing lust or greed or murder or injustice from taking root. The very essence of the church preaching and living out the gospel proclaims judgment against the enemies of God and serves as what Paul calls a clear sign to them of their destruction. This may be why Jesus says we are to be salt of the earth immediately after describing the persecution we'll face if we follow him. Frequently, of course, the church has failed to live this and has been an accelerator of worldly evil, not a break. But Jesus knew that would happen. That's why almost all his words of judgment are directed to the people of God rather than the unbelieving world. We need to be salted too. I was pondering on these words, particularly in light of the fact that we have had Waitangi weekend. And I think this is where we can acknowledge that there is injustice that has taken root in our land. And what is our response to be as Christians? Over the summer, I read some history books. And I read one, and it was about the Taranaki region and some of the early settlers there. It was a story written by a son a long time ago, but describing his father, who was one of the first European settlers in the Taranaki region. He told the story. This man, his father, had been a Quaker. So Quaker is sort of a Christian group that traditionally hasn't believed in war or fighting. So he was a Quaker. He had dreams of setting up a new life for himself in this new land, New Zealand. So he hopped on a boat from Scotland and came to New Zealand, leaving his fiancée behind. And he went to the west coast where he was going to make his fortune mining for gold. And he did not make his fortune mining for gold, as did most people not make a fortune. That didn't really make sense. But anyway, he was poor. He didn't really have anything. He'd left his fiancée behind, promising riches and glory in this new land and that he'd send for her, and he couldn't. So after 3 years, he's kind of thinking, what am I going to do? I can't afford to go back to Scotland. Here I am. What happens next? At the same time, the newly formed New Zealand government put out a call, and it said, if you come and fight against Māori, we will give you land. And so he went to Taranaki and fought in the wars and got given the land of the people who owned it. And this was repeated in this region. The reason I read this and the reason I was interested in this story is this is my ancestors. This is who came to New Zealand in hope of a better life. And this is what they did. And this weekend, we focus on Waitangi, this beautiful promise that people made to each other to protect rights and the promises that were broken. And we ponder the injustice of that. And I've seen in the news lots of people saying, let's just make it a celebration. Why does it have to be so depressing? Why can't it be a bit happier? And to do that would be to forget about what has happened in the past. And if you are Pākehā, we are good at forgetting our past. Been studying some te reo over the holidays, and one of the things, this is why I did it, I had to go back. Where am I from? Who are my ancestors? I clinged to the fact that my ancestors were Wallaces, which probably means I'm related to William Wallace, who fought against oppressors. But really, I have to also wrestle with the fact that another set of ancestors became the oppressor. We have to wrestle with our past. We cannot pretend it doesn't exist. Saw this interesting post on Facebook this week. Someone says this: the gravy train line gets repeated a lot, but repetition doesn't make it true. Treaty settlements aren't handouts. They're legal agreements acknowledging that the Crown broke its own promises and took land resources and economic foundations that can never fully be returned. Most settlements are a tiny fraction of what was lost, and the money doesn't go into individuals' pockets. It goes into long-term iwi projects like housing, education, health and jobs for future generations. Calling that a gravy train doesn't expose injustice. It ignores history and mocks the idea of accountability. If justice feels like generosity to you, it might be time to ask why. Risky putting that on the internet, because then out came the replies, and here were some of the things that people were writing. Why are we still paying for what England did 200 years ago? Let England sort it. Keep looking in the rear vision mirror and you're going to end up crashing. One people, one country. This is like a broken record. How much more money do they want? What happened in the past happened, and it's sad you have had what's owed. Stop bleeding the government every year for more. It's time to draw a line on this. These are sentiments we hear, and I think we hear them more. In the last few years, there's been a culture of discussion that has grown, where more and more we're hearing these kind of, debates and people saying, forget about the treaty, who even cares about it? It was interesting to see some of the other comments that were made, in this discussion in reply. This one says, it's hardly a gravy train, or anywhere near as significant as the actual loss to Māori. All current settlements add up to approximately 3 months' super payments. Hardly a big cost in the context of government spending. I did quick calculations. I think it's slightly more than that, but it's pretty close. It's not much money in terms of government spending. This person observes this. If people want to talk about gravy trains, there is a Pākehā gravy train. The New Zealand government agreed to a support package of about $500 million to AMI insurance and warned it might end up to around $1 billion to keep the company solvent. Companies have received billions of dollars in government support over the years. No treaty breach required, no land taken, no public outrage. I was pondering that, and I was pondering this land out here. That land used to be filled with houses, and through no fault of anybody's, the land was destroyed and it couldn't support rebuild. And the government compensated every single house owner. Billions and billions of dollars spent so that people wouldn't be out of pocket for losing their land. And yet the same courtesy has not been extended to Māori. And here is the challenge in our nation. We can choose to say, I'm not looking backwards, I'm not looking at history, I'm only looking from today. But if we are to be salt in this world, one of the calls of that is to fight against injustice. If we are to be light in the darkness, we have to be able to name what the darkness and sorrow and injustice in our country actually is. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take us through a time of confession, where we acknowledge that we have fallen short. And there's going to be multiple different people in this room coming from different perspectives. If you are like me and your ancestors go a long way back in this country, I'd really encourage you to grapple with these words and what they are saying. If you are living in this country and you benefit from all the good things that we have, I'd encourage you to wrestle with where they come from. If you are Māori and you are in pain because the rights of your ancestors have been trod on, can you hear our confession? Before we do that, I want to read to you from Psalm 107. It talks about how God brings judgment through salt, but it also talks about how God brings restoration. And that is my prayer for this country, that somehow we learn what it means to bring justice, to bring unity not based on forgetfulness, but on fairness. Psalm 107. God turns rivers into a desert, springs of water into thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salty waste, because of the wickedness of its inhabitants. God turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water, and there he lets the hungry live. And they establish a town to live in. They sow fields and plant vineyards and get a fruitful yield. By his blessings they multiply greatly, and he does not let their cattle decrease. When they are diminished and brought low, through oppression, trouble and sorrow, he pours contempt on princes, and he makes them wander in trackless wastes. But he raises up the needy out of distress and makes their families like flocks. The upright see it and are glad, and all wickedness stops its mouth. Let those who are wise give heed to these things and consider the steadfast love of the Lord. In a minute, the musicians are going to come up as we do this time of confession, and there's words up there, and if you feel that you can say them, there's a bit for us all to join in that says, Lord have mercy, or Christ have mercy. And I think it's worth pondering, what does it mean to say sorry? What does it mean to repent? What does it mean to confess? In the Bible, the idea of repentance is that people turn around and face the other way. I think that's important to know because as part of this, I'm going to do a traditional Anglican thing. After we have done the confession, we're going to sing a song of confession. I'm going to do a traditional absolution, which is just a reminder that we are forgiven. But I don't want this to be glib, because this is pretty intense stuff. I think to remind ourselves we're forgiven, it's not like, phew, I never have to think about that again. It's a reminder, turn around, face the other way. Let's walk in the way of light. Let's be salt of the earth.